everyone and welcome back to my allotment. It is the end of September now, and if there is one thing that the end of September means to me, it is apple harvest. So I have popped up to the allotment today to harvest my apple tree and tidy up some of the apples that are rotting on the floor underneath it, and take some apples home to make an apple pie, which, if you're interested, I will show you how to make it and share the recipe. Apple pie is one of the simplest things that you can make, and it's so seasonal and so delicious and so cheap if you have the apples already to hand. So I do hope that you give it a go, and if you do, leave me a comment down below letting me know what you think. But for now, let's get to it. Hello everyone and welcome back to my kitchen. So today we're going to be making that apple pie recipe that we picked the apples for earlier in the video. So I'm going to be going over this in two parts today. So firstly, we're going to go over how to make the pastry, and secondly, I'm going to go over how I make my apple pie filling. And don't worry if you can't follow along with the video, because I'm going to put in the description box below a list of all of the ingredients and instructions, so you can refer to them later. Okay, so let's start with the pastry. So the first thing we need to do is weigh out our ingredients. Now, this is a short crust pastry, and the way I remember how to make this is that it should be half fat to flour. And I find this easiest to remember if I do it in ounces. So, sorry to all my European friends, this is a bit old-fashioned. I do 8 ounces of flour to 4 ounces of butter. Now, I've already got my butter measured out here. It is important to keep this very, very cold, so there are two things to remember with pastry. The first is to keep everything cold, and the second is not to overwork it. So do make sure, it is important that your butter is ice cold from the fridge. So that was 4 ounces of butter, and double that is going to be 8 ounces of flour. If I can get my scales to cooperate with me, there we go. And I'm just using regular plain flour that you can get from any supermarket, nothing fancy. So measure out 8 ounces of flour. To that, just for flavour, I like to add a pinch of salt, and it makes sense to do that now. So there we go. Once you've added enough water to get your dough to come together in a kind of rough ball, you want to transfer that into the fridge to rest for half an hour. You can do this by wrapping it in clingfilm, or as I've got here, I've got a beeswax wrap with a bit of flour on it to stop it sticking. But basically just get it in the fridge to rest. So it's always a little more awkward to wrap it in these things. Now that we've got our pastry chilling in the fridge for half an hour, we can move on to making the filling. Now for that, we are going to need to peel, core and slice 1.2 kilos of apples, and I have a little gadget that I use to do all of that for me in one go, so I'm going to be using this. I think I got it for about £10 a couple of years ago on Amazon, I think, and it is a lot more fun to use than it should be, as I'm sure you'll see in just a second. But step one is to peel, core and slice your apples and put them in a bowl ready to use, and you might like to cover them with a dash of lemon juice while they're in the bowl, because this will stop them going brown. Okay, so I'm done with using the apple slicer now, and what that has left me with is 1.2 kilos of apples which have been sliced into very cute little spirals. So I'm going to go through these now and take off any bits where there's still a little bit of skin and chop these into more appropriate sized chunks. So now we have our bowl of nicely sliced apples, and to this we are going to need to add 200 grams of caster sugar. Caster sugar is the one that you normally use for baking, as opposed to granulated, which is the slightly larger grain one that you put in tea. I know lots of different countries have different names for this, but this is the one that you want. So 200 grams of sugar. And don't be afraid to add more or less depending on whether you like your things sweet or not. I like my things to be not too sweet, so this is going to come out just how I like it. If you would like your pie to be sweeter, add more sugar. To our sugary apples, we're going to need to add half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. And I'd like to add 2 tablespoons of corn flour because I find this helps to absorb the juices and make the sauce stick together a bit better. So scatter that over. So now it is time to start cooking our filling. Now I like to cook the filling for 5 minutes first because I find this helps the flour to absorb the juices that the apple gives out, and it means that we don't end up with a soggy bottom, which is exactly what we want to avoid. So you need to get yourself a large saucepan and 40 grams of butter and start melting that down on the hob. While that's melting, I'm going to mix together my apple and flour a little bit so that when it goes into the pan it should get absorbed a bit better. Butter melt. So once your butter has melted, tip your apple mixture into the pan and start to cook it down slowly. So depending on how firm and crunchy your apples are, you don't want to do this for too long because the idea is to retain a bit of shape at the end. So these apples here, I know from experience, they tend to go pulpy quite quickly, which is not exactly what I want, but that's what I've got, so that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to add my apples into the pan now. Making sure I scrape out all of that lovely sugar. Give that a good stir. Okay, so I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes and then check it after. And we'll see how it looks. So after 5 or so minutes, this is what you end up with. I can see that the sauce has formed around the apples, but they still have retained their shape. A couple are starting to go slightly mushy, but largely you can still see apple pieces. And what I'm going to do now is set this aside to cool while I roll out my pastry. Okay, so now that our filling is cooling over here on the hob, we are going to want to roll out our pastry. So there's a couple of things you need to know when working with pastry. You want to avoid touching it unless you absolutely have to, and you want to try and work quickly and confidently with it so that you don't overwork it basically, or that's going to make it go very tough. So the way to do that is to flour your surface well and flour your rolling pin, and keep flouring the top of the pastry each time you turn it. So I will show you that now. Be sure to flour the top of the surface each time you turn it as well. So you want to go away from you and towards you, and then reflour and turn it 90 degrees clockwise. And just keep rolling it out until you've got something that will cover the width of your pie dish. Now I have gone for just a standard falconware tin. It's the one that comes in the set of 3. It's the largest of the 3. And I have greased it well with butter, so you are going to want to grease your tin. And how I like to do that is to keep old butter wrappers, and they're excellent for just rubbing the butter around the pan. So keep an eye on your rolling pin and the top of the dough, and any sign that it might start to stick, don't be afraid to add more flour. Okay, so that's getting to the point now where it is larger than my pie dish. It's starting to stick a little. So a fun little tip for how to transfer this into your dish is to get your rolling pin and lift your pastry like that. Get your dish, and then just carefully unroll it so that it covers your dish. And then I like to very gently work the pastry so that it sits nicely in the tin. Until you end up with something that looks a bit like this. Okay, and once you've got to that point, what you're going to want to do is get a sharp knife and then go around the edge of your dish, leaving a bit of a gap. So don't cut very close to the edge, but cut just slightly away from it, because you'll find that the pastry will tend to shrink back once you've cut it. So trim away the excess pastry, and then we're going to set that aside and use the remaining pastry to form the strips for the lattice. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to roll this out again and cut quite wide strips. I like my strips slightly over 1 inch wide to form the top. pastry and keep your rolling pin well floured to avoid everything sticking, because that is absolutely not what we want. And obviously you need the strips to be only as wide as your pie dish is, so be careful not to roll it out too much. I'm thinking this looks about right. There we are. I'm going to cut my strips this way. You don't have to do a lattice top if you would prefer not to do this. You can just roll out this and then use this to be your pie top. Remember that if you do that, you need to include some holes so the steam can escape. And the most common way that's done for an apple pie is to mimic how the seeds look in a core. So if you're looking top down, to do 5 small slits coming out from the middle of your pie. I like the lattice look, and it's not as difficult to do as you might assume that it is. So if you want to stick with me, I'll show you the best way to lattice your pie. Oh, so that's my strips ready. Don't need that one, that one. So I will move those out of our way and then bring my pie dish back into the centre so that I can put the filling in and we'll lattice the top. While you're doing this, you want to have your oven heating, so you're going to need to bake this at 170 Celsius if you have a fan oven and 190 if you don't. If you're American and you need that in Fahrenheit, I can't help you, I have no idea. Right, so let's bring that back. Wash my hands and we'll tip in the filling. It's at about this point that I really wish I'd picked a less heavy pan. I'm going to find this pretty awkward, I think, trying to tip it in all in one go, but I reckon I'll still attempt it. So go, why not? Let's just check. You want to make sure that your filling is quite cool before you do this, because obviously if you put something hot onto the pastry and the butter's going to start to melt, then that's going to end up with soggy pastry, soggy bottoms all around, which is what we're trying to avoid. Okay, so for the lattice work, you want to put half of your lattice onto your pie, and then you want to fold back halfway half of the strips. So that would be, in this case, that one and that one, and this one. And then you want to take one of your neck strips and just lay that across. And then fold them back. Each of the ones that you folded down to start with. And then fold back the others that you didn't fold to start. Carefully, and then lay across your next strip. Just repeat that. It's not that one. This one. Until you hit the edge. Which I will do this strip here. And then once you've done that half of the pie, like so, turn the whole thing round and repeat the process, making sure to start with folding back the ones that have gone underneath at the start there. So fold back those. Lay across my strip. Actually, I'm going to take back into position. And you should have a pie that looks a bit like this. And at this point, I like to firm down the edges and even sometimes use a rolling pin just to get that nice and smooth edge. And then take a knife, and where you can just about see the dish poking through, scoot all the way around the edge to remove the excess pastry. And hopefully that should mean pastry doesn't start springing back too much from the sides of your dish. There we are, that's that. Clear away my excess pastry. And the only thing that remains now is to egg wash this and then bake it. Okay, so pretty much all that remains is the taste test. Here's my pie. This is my big Blue Peter moment. I've always wanted to say, here's one I made earlier. So here it is, and pretty much all that's left is for me to give it a taste. And I hope that you will have a go at making this. I'm sure you've seen by now, it's very, very easy. It's cheap, it's tasty, and there's no reason not to. So please do have a go and let me know what you think down below in the comments. But for now, I'll see you next time, and I'm going to go off and enjoy my pie. Bye! Come on. Oh, oh no, oh no, you got me. Oh. Come on, Scales. Come on.